The security cameras would capture everything, but Marcus Thompson didn't care anymore. His steel-toed boots echoed through the empty community center chapel as he stared at the Virgin Mary statue the Hispanic families had donated last month. 20 years of leading a satanic cult had taught him exactly how to desecrate what people held sacred, and tonight's job rejection had pushed him past caring about consequences. He unzipped his pants and began urinating on the base of the statue, watching the liquid pool around the carved flowers at Mary's feet. The moment his stream hit the sacred marble, the chapel lights flickered violently. The temperature plummeted so fast his breath became visible, and every candle in the room suddenly blazed higher. Marcus zipped up and stepped back, but something was wrong. The air felt thick, electric like the moment before lightning strikes. Behind him, the chapel doors slammed shut with a sound that echoed like thunder. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The statue's eyes seemed to follow him now, and roses. He could smell roses everywhere, impossibly sweet and strong, filling the chapel with a presence that made his knees weak. This wasn't supposed to happen. Sacred objects were just stone and wood, symbols that only had power because weak people believed in them. But the roses kept getting stronger, and the statue kept watching him with eyes that seemed alive, patient, and heartbroken all at once. Marcus burst through the chapel doors and ran for his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The smell of roses followed him into the parking lot, impossible and overwhelming. He gunned the engine and tore out onto the empty street, desperate to put distance between himself and whatever had just happened in that chapel. 3 blocks from the community center, his brake pedal went to the floor. He pumped it frantically, but the car kept accelerating down the hill toward the intersection. The steering wheel locked hard to the right, jerking the vehicle toward the concrete barrier. His radio crackled to life, playing a hymn he had never heard before, a woman's voice singing about mercy and forgiveness in words that seemed to pierce straight through his chest. The crash should have killed him. The paramedics would say so later, shaking their heads at the twisted metal that had been his sedan. But in the moment before impact, Marcus saw her through the windshield. A woman in flowing blue robes, her hands outstretched toward his car, her face filled with the same patient sorrow he had seen in the statue's eyes. The airbag deployed, but something else cushioned the impact. Something warm and protective wrapped around him as the car crumpled against the barrier. Glass exploded inward, but not a single shard touched his skin. Steam rose from the crushed engine, but Marcus sat in perfect stillness, surrounded by that impossible scent of roses and the lingering echo of the hymn that still played from his destroyed radio. Dr. Patricia Davis had worked emergency medicine for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like Marcus Thompson's case. His car looked like it had been fed through a metal shredder, yet he sat on the examination table with nothing more than minor bruises. The CT scans showed no internal bleeding, no broken bones, no signs of the massive trauma that should have accompanied a crash of that magnitude. She was still reviewing his impossible medical charts when Linda Martinez arrived at the hospital. The community center director clutched a tablet showing the security footage from the chapel, her face pale with shock and something that looked like reverent fear. Marcus tried to explain what he had seen during the crash, but the words felt inadequate. How could he describe the woman in blue who had appeared in front of his car, her hands outstretched as if she were catching him? How could he make anyone understand the warmth that had surrounded him, protecting him from death itself? Linda set the tablet on the bedside table and pressed play. The chapel security camera had captured everything, the lights flickering as Marcus desecrated the statue. The temperature change so dramatic that frost appeared on the lens. The chapel doors slamming shut with no one near them. But most startling of all was the final frame, just before Marcus fled. The Virgin Mary statue appeared to move, turning her head slightly as if watching him leave, a single tear glistening on her marble cheek. The security footage went viral within hours. Linda Martinez had tried to keep it private, sharing it only with the parish council, but someone leaked it to social media. By morning, Marcus Thompson's face was everywhere, identified as the man who had desecrated the Virgin Mary statue that dozens of Hispanic families had saved money to donate. The community center's phone rang nonstop with death threats and demands for his immediate firing. Protesters gathered outside the building, holding rosaries and signs calling for justice. The local news picked up the story, interviewing outraged parishioners who described the statue as the spiritual heart of their neighborhood. Marcus's sister Susan saw the footage on her phone while eating breakfast with her 80-year-old son. She had been praying for her brother's conversion for 20 years, ever since he had disappeared into that satanic cult. But seeing him urinate on the Virgin Mary filled her with a shame so deep she could barely breathe. When Susan called him, her voice shook with hurt and anger. "Marcus, you've done some terrible things, but this crosses every line. That statue means everything to those families. They worked double shifts to pay for it. How could you destroy something so sacred to people who trusted you?" Marcus tried to explain about the supernatural events, the woman in blue who had saved him, but Susan hung up before he could finish. His few remaining relationships crumbled that day as friends and distant relatives saw the footage and turned away in disgust. Marcus returned to his empty apartment expecting silence, but the roses were waiting for him. The scent filled every room, sweet and overwhelming, despite having no flowers anywhere in the building. He opened all the windows, turned on fans, even sprayed air freshener, but the fragrance only grew stronger. That first night, she appeared at the foot of his bed. The same woman in blue from the crash, her face illuminated by a soft light that seemed to come from within her robes. She didn't speak, but her eyes held the same patient sorrow he had seen in the statue. When he blinked, she vanished, leaving only the roses and a warmth in his chest he couldn't explain. The cuts and bruises from the crash were healing impossibly fast. By the third day, the deep gash on his forehead had closed completely, leaving not even a scar. Dr. Davis called twice, asking him to return for follow-up examinations, her voice filled with medical curiosity that bordered on amazement. Marcus tried to dismiss everything as hallucinations brought on by trauma, but the supernatural encounters intensified. He would wake to find rosary beads on his nightstand that hadn't been there before. Holy water appeared in his kitchen sink. Most unsettling of all were the moments when he caught his reflection praying in mirrors, his lips moving in words he didn't remember speaking, his hands folded in gestures of supplication he hadn't made since childhood. The woman in blue returned each night, always silent, always sorrowful, always patient, as if waiting for something he wasn't ready to give. The call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Marcus from another rose-scented dream of the woman in blue. Susan's voice was broken, barely recognizable through her sobbing. "It's Tommy," she gasped into the phone. "There was an accident. A drunk driver hit him while he was riding his bike home from practice. Marcus, he's dying. The doctors say he might not make it through the night." Marcus threw on clothes and drove to the hospital, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. 80-year-old Tommy was the only family member who still hugged him at gatherings, the only one who didn't know about his dark past or understand why everyone else kept their distance. The boy had bright eyes and Susan's gentle smile, and he collected baseball cards with the fierce dedication only children possess. In the ICU waiting room, Susan collapsed against his chest, 20 years of estrangement temporarily forgotten in her grief. "The doctors say there's nothing more they can do," she whispered. "His brain injuries are too severe. They want to discuss removing life support tomorrow." Through the observation window, Marcus could see his nephew connected to machines that beeped and hummed, keeping his small body alive. Tommy's face was peaceful despite the tubes and wires, but Marcus could see the subtle signs that the medical team was preparing the family for the worst. For the first time in decades, Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls of anger and cynicism cracking. This innocent child might die, and all his adult rage seemed suddenly meaningless in the face of such pure loss. Marcus knelt beside Tommy's hospital bed at 4 in the morning, his pride finally shattered by the sight of machines breathing for his nephew. Susan had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted from hours of crying, and the ICU was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors that measured what remained of a little boy's life. He had spent 20 years rejecting every form of prayer, mocking every plea for divine intervention, but desperation stripped away his intellectual defenses. "Mary," he whispered, feeling foolish and desperate and completely broken. "I know what I did to your statue. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But this kid never hurt anybody. He collects baseball cards and feeds stray cats and still believes in magic." The words came faster now, decades of suppressed grief pouring out in the darkness. "Take me instead. Take my life. Take whatever you want from me, but let him live. I'll change everything. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did to your sacred space. Just please don't let this innocent child pay for my sins." The moment he surrendered completely, the roses returned. Not just the scent this time, but actual petals falling from the ceiling, landing on Tommy's blanket and the medical equipment with impossible gentleness. The monitors began changing, heart rate strengthening, brain activity increasing in patterns that made the night nurse gasp and call for doctors. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, clear and focused for the first time in days, and he smiled at his uncle with perfect recognition and love. Tommy's miraculous recovery made local news within hours, but Marcus knew he couldn't hide behind the miracle. Dr. Davis documented brain activity that defied medical explanation, but Marcus felt compelled to address what he had done to cause the crisis of faith in his community. He needed to face Father Kevin O'Connor. The priest was tending roses in the church garden when Marcus approached, his hands shaking with nervous energy. "Father, I'm the man who desecrated the Virgin Mary statue at the community center. I've come to confess and ask forgiveness, not just from God, but from the families whose sacred space I violated." Father O'Connor set down his pruning shears and studied Marcus with eyes that held both sternness and compassion. The elderly priest had heard confessions for 40 years, but something in Marcus's demeanor suggested genuine repentance rather than mere guilt or fear of consequences. Marcus knelt in the garden dirt, not caring about the stains on his clothes. "I spent 20 years leading people away from God, and 3 days ago, I committed the worst sacrilege of my life. But she saved me anyway. The Virgin Mary protected me from a crash that should have killed me. And last night, she healed my nephew when doctors said he was beyond hope." He described every supernatural encounter, every rose-scented visitation, every moment of divine intervention that had pursued him despite his resistance. Father O'Connor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as Marcus recounted details that aligned with miraculous accounts he had studied in seminary decades earlier. Marcus arrived at the community center before dawn, carrying a toolkit and cleaning supplies he had purchased with his last paycheck. The damaged chapel still smelled faintly of roses, and the desecrated Virgin Mary statue stood in the corner, carefully covered with a white cloth by the maintenance staff, who couldn't bear to look at the stains he had left. Linda Martinez found him scrubbing the marble base with a toothbrush, working to remove every trace of his violation. She watched in silence as he carefully cleaned the intricate carved flowers, his hands gentle and reverent in a way that contradicted everything she knew about his past. "I know you probably have to fire me," he said without looking up from his work. "I know the community wants me gone, and I understand why. But I need to make this right first. I've contacted a stone restoration specialist who can repair the damage, and I'm using my savings to commission a replacement statue if this one can't be saved." Linda studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or false repentance, but found only exhaustion and genuine remorse. The security footage of his supernatural encounters had shaken her own faith in ways she was still processing, and Tommy's miraculous recovery was being discussed in hushed tones throughout the Hispanic community. Marcus spent the entire day cleaning and beginning repairs, refusing breaks or assistance. Father O'Connor arrived in the evening with members of the parish council who had come to witness his acts of reparation. They watched him work in respectful silence, some beginning to believe that divine grace might actually transform even the most hardened hearts. Tommy's first words after his recovery were about the pretty lady in blue who had visited him in his dreams, describing her exactly as Marcus had seen her. This innocent testimony from a child who knew nothing about the statue incident convinced Susan that something genuinely miraculous had occurred through her brother's desperate prayer. She found Marcus installing the new Virgin Mary statue, his movements careful and reverent as he positioned the sacred figure in her place of honor. "Susan, I'm sorry," he said without turning around, "for everything I put you through. For all the years I chose darkness over family. For making you ashamed to have me as a brother." Susan watched him work, noting the gentleness in his hands, the way he whispered what sounded like prayers as he secured the statue's base. The angry, bitter man who had disappeared into satanic rituals 20 years ago was being replaced by someone she barely recognized but desperately wanted to trust. Marcus began volunteering at the youth center where Tommy played basketball, sharing his story with teenagers who had been drawn toward gangs and destructive influences. His testimony was stark and honest. He described the emptiness that had driven him to seek power through darkness, and the divine mercy that had pursued him even at his lowest point. The kids listened because he understood their anger. Parents began allowing their children to attend his talks because his transformation was becoming undeniable. Marcus Thompson, former satanic cult leader, was becoming a bridge between the community's pain and its capacity for forgiveness. Investigative journalist Rebecca Chun arrived in town, determined to debunk what she considered a manipulative hoax. She had built her career exposing religious fraud and was convinced that Marcus Thompson was exploiting community grief for personal gain. Her plan was simple: interview the witnesses, review the evidence, and write an exposé revealing the psychological and technical explanations behind the supposed miracles. Her skepticism began cracking during her first interview with Dr. Patricia Davis. The emergency physician provided medical records documenting healing that defied scientific explanation. "Marcus should have died in that crash," Dr. Davis said quietly. "The impact measurements, the vehicle damage, the trajectory analysis, all indicate fatal injuries." Yet he walked away without serious harm. Rebecca examined the security footage frame by frame, consulting with video analysis experts who confirmed the images hadn't been digitally manipulated. The temperature changes, the flickering lights, and the apparent movement of the statue were documented by multiple cameras with different angles and timestamps. But her conversion moment came while interviewing Marcus himself. She had prepared aggressive questions designed to expose inconsistencies in his story, but found herself face to face with genuine humility that couldn't be faked. As he spoke about his nephew's healing, rose petals began falling in the interview room despite no flowers being present anywhere in the building. Rebecca watched the petals land on her notebook, soft and fragrant and utterly impossible, and realized she was witnessing something that transcended her understanding of reality. Her article, published 2 weeks later, carried the headline, "When Miracles Happen to the Last Person Who Deserves Them." 6 months later, the community center chapel had become an unexpected pilgrimage site. People traveled from across the country to pray before the Virgin Mary statue, where divine intervention had transformed a man's heart. Marcus Thompson, once the town's most reviled resident, now served as a living testament to the power of redemption that could reach even the most hardened souls. He knelt before the statue each morning, his prayers mixing gratitude with requests for wisdom to help others who struggled with anger and spiritual darkness. The scent of roses still accompanied his prayers, a gentle reminder that grace pursued him even when he had rejected it completely. Tommy, now fully recovered and back to collecting baseball cards, often joined his uncle for morning prayers. The boy spoke to the Virgin Mary as if she were a dear friend, thanking her for saving both his life and his uncle's soul in the same miraculous intervention. Marcus had started a support group for former gang members and people leaving destructive lifestyles, sharing his story of supernatural rescue with those who felt beyond hope. Each week, new faces appeared, drawn by testimonies of divine mercy that could transform even the most resistant hearts. Father O'Connor often reminded parishioners that Marcus's story proved no one was too far gone for redemption. The man who had desecrated their sacred space had become its most devoted guardian, spending hours each day maintaining the chapel and counseling others who sought the same grace that had saved him from himself. Have you ever witnessed grace transform someone who seemed beyond hope? Share your story of redemption in the comments below.